Have you ever wondered where you really stand with God? Are you overcome with feelings of guilt because of things you've done wrong? Are you tired of religion that focuses on rules that you can't keep? Have we got good news for you? It's time to listen in on some casual conversation with Mike Kapler and Joel Brieseke and discover what true freedom is all about. This is Growing in Grace.
Okay, are we rolling? Is this thing on? Yes. We are here. It's Growing in Grace. We're kind of in the middle of a series that we're doing here on why Jesus taught two covenants. It's very important for us to understand things like this. If you're just new to the podcast, I really think it'd probably be a good idea to go back to the beginning of this series and follow along from the beginning. Otherwise, thanks for coming along, and we're going to be hopefully lifting you up and making you feel better. You know, some people say, well, this is just a feel-good gospel. You guys are just trying to make people feel good. Well, yes, we are, because the gospel is good news, and good news is supposed to make you feel good. And so follow along, and Cap, how's things with you?
Boy, what you just said really ruffled my feathers, because why does the gospel have to be difficult and hard? I think where people get some of that, granted, the apostles, they went through a tremendous amount of persecution. Many of them died for what they believed, and there were some rough things going on there because of what they believed. But the gospel itself isn't supposed to be bad news, and that's all we're talking about here is the accomplished work of Jesus Christ. We're not saying that life is always going to be a bed of roses. Right. There will be circumstances that occur in many of our lives that are going to bring sorrow and regret and pain. There will be some suffering in this fallen world. We've never said that wasn't going to be the case. We've never said that. But, Joel, the gospel is good news, and God is not here to try to put people through some sort of a grind to make life harder just because we're Christians. Keep in mind, what those apostles went through when they were going through what they did, and the people who died at the hands of the persecutors were religious people. Generally, they were Jewish people who adhered to the law, and they went after those who were against the law. It's pretty much as simple as that. Mm-hmm. Remember, that's why, in something we're going to get into here, that's why Jesus was often challenged on what he really believed about the law. See, the religious people, the scribes, the Pharisees, and others, were a little confused on just exactly where Jesus stood on some of this. And so they were trying to, because some of what he taught seemed to contradict the Mosaic law, but they couldn't really quite pin him down on it, and many tried. They would try to trap him and catch him saying something, quote unquote, against the law, because one who did that was worthy of death. And so the story we're looking at this week, and we'll see how far we get past this, but starting out with this, the woman caught in the act of adultery. We're finally going to see something here where good news gets ministered. It wasn't just the law. It wasn't just Jesus trying to elevate commandments to show people they couldn't keep them, but something unique that is related to the new covenant was going to occur here. But what happened? The scribes, Pharisees, they brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery, placed her in the midst of wherever they were, I think it was at the temple, and said, "Hey, teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery." Now, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such a woman or such women. What do you say? And so, again, what's he going to say? They're trying to trap him, mm-hmm. and they're looking for an opportunity, ultimately, to put Jesus to death.
Yeah. Now, if you're one of these people that we were talking about, that you think we're preaching this feel-good gospel, so we're talking about this woman caught in adultery, well, you guys are just going to try to make people feel good about sin. Well, no. You see, that's the thing. I think when grace gets preached and people don't listen to the full message of what grace teachers are saying, that might be the idea that they get. This woman was caught in adultery. Under the law, the punishment was death. The woman was to be stoned. What we're talking about here that's good news and that is meant to make us feel good is God's response in the new covenant. God's response through Christ to this woman caught in adultery. Did Jesus say, "Oh, You were caught in the act. That's pretty good. Keep that up. Keep up the good work. Of course not. That's not what we're saying either. But here's what happened. Now Moses, in the law, commanded that such should be stoned. But what do you say? These are what the Pharisees and the scribes said to Jesus. And like you were saying, Cap, they were testing him. They were trying to get him to say something against the law or against their own rules that they had come up with or whatever. They were testing him. Jesus, he had stooped down, wrote something on the ground with his finger. You might say he was ignoring them, but of course he was listening. He knew what was going on. And here's what he said to them. Now remember, the response under the law, this woman should be stoned. She should be put to death. Here's what Jesus said after he had raised himself up. He said to them, "He who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first." That's all that he had to say to them. That's the only thing he said to them. Now remember, their response, they came dragging this woman. They were going to stone her. All these things. The law says this. You need to do this to her. She needs to die. What do you say? All that Jesus said is, whoever's without sin among you, you can throw the first stone. Go ahead. And that was it. That's all he said to them. And then what happened? The people who heard what Jesus said, they realized that the same law that they were using to convict that woman also convicted them, because it says those who heard it, being convicted by their conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest, even to the last.
What a masterful answer that was. He said nothing against the law, but nobody had the right to throw a stone based on what Jesus said. Nobody had that right. According to the law, they may have had that right, Joel. Some people think that because Jesus said that, he was somehow trying to show them that the law was wrong or something like that. But no, by that standard of the law, they could have started hurling their rocks. But when Jesus threw that challenge out there, the stones got dropped.
No, there's the thing. Yeah, just real quick. They had every right to do that. He was not stopping them. He didn't tell them don't throw stones. He said, throw a stone at her if you're without, So anyway, like you were saying, he didn't say that the law was bad. He was giving them every opportunity to follow the law.
Right. And so they walked out, dropping their stones, the oldest going first, because they had more sins probably. And so that's the way it worked out. So then it's just Jesus and her. Who condemns you now? No one, Lord. She recognized him for who he was, Lord, and realized she had just received a miracle. And what happened here really is a taste of the forthcoming new covenant, where she was not condemned. She was shown mercy and given grace to go. This go and sin no more. Jesus wasn't saying, I know we've talked about this before, but sometimes take a look at what Jesus didn't say to her. He didn't say, go and sin no more or else.
Right.
It wasn't a command with a condition, which would have been from the law. The law had those commands that had conditions. This was just an exhortation. Go and sin no more. She's been empowered now. She's been freed. And I think the exhortation here is don't go getting caught in the same snare you just got caught in, and move forward, because this sin thing, it really isn't going to profit you anything. But he didn't threaten her with, to me, Joel, the most obvious card that Jesus could have pulled out of his sleeve in this situation was he could have said, remember, don't break the seventh commandment ever again. He didn't go there. Why? Because we if you've listened to this program for any length of time, we know elevating the law itself, even though it's holy, righteous, and good, for those who were under it, it brought death, condemnation, and an increase in sin, not a decrease in sin with those commandments, including those written on stone. So, to minister the law to this woman would have resulted in the opposite of what would have been intended. It would have brought on the inability to attain to righteous living. So Jesus didn't go down that road either. Another thing he didn't say is, if you don't sin anymore, guess what? I won't condemn you. He didn't say any of that. He just said, go on your way. Don't do this anymore. And wow, what an incredible example of what people would be experiencing in the new covenant here.
You know, this series is titled "Why Jesus Taught Two Covenants," and so I want to correct something I said a little bit ago. I at least implied that in the new covenant, here's what Jesus' response was to the woman. But like you were saying, it was more of he gave her a taste of what was coming in the new covenant, because at this time, the new covenant had not begun yet. Jesus hadn't died yet. The testator hadn't died. The new covenant had not come into effect. And so what was happening here is that if you listen to the past several weeks of this podcast series, we've been talking about various things that Jesus said that were law-based to his fellow Jews who were under the law. He was using the law. Here's the awesome thing. He was using the law in many cases to show people that they weren't as righteous as they thought they were, to bring them to the end of themselves. Here, in this case, Jesus was confronted with those who were using the law against somebody, and Jesus showed them through their use of the law how unrighteous they were. You see what the law does? People were using the law to condemn others because they wanted the full punishment of the law to be taken out on other people. Jesus used the law to show people, you're not as righteous as you think you are. You need something else. You need faith. In this instance, you need salvation that's not earned by what you do. That can only come as a gift. That's what Jesus was showing these people. In this instance, this woman got it while these other people were trying to use the law to condemn somebody for the purpose of condemnation. Jesus took what they said and showed the woman that, hey, you don't have to live that way. You can be free. You don't have to do what you've been doing. Again, when people hear this story, a lot of times they quote that, "Go and sin no more," as if that's the big point here. Well, Jesus could have started off with that, "Go and sin no more," but he didn't. He showed her that she was forgiven. He showed her that there's no condemnation, and then he offered her the way out. You don't need to do this anymore.
Yeah, remember the rich young ruler. He thought he had sort of sanctified himself, set himself apart by keeping the commands, and he walked away sad after his encounter with Jesus. On the other hand, this woman, she was caught breaking the commandments and walked away free. There's a difference between the old covenant and the new covenant, and of course we've got much more to say about this ministry that Jesus put forth, teaching both old and new, and we'll get to more of that here on Growing in Grace next week.
Yeah, and in fact, next week, something that's a huge contrast in the words that Jesus spoke. Sometimes, as we've talked about, he would have these harsh, hard words, all these hard things that people would have to do if they were going to be his disciple. And at other times, he would say things like, "Come to me, you who are weary and heavy laden. I will give you rest." So what's the deal? Did Jesus have a split personality? Was he just one big walking contradiction? Or did it have something to do with these two different covenants? That's what we're going to get into next week. Jesus said, "I will give you rest." That's next week right here on Growing in Grace.
This has been Growing in Grace with Mike Kapler and Joel Brieseke, heard online through various internet sources around the world each week. To access hundreds of past programs, visit graceroots.org. Share it with a friend and listen again next week for more Growing in Grace.